What's going on guys, Jin here, and this is Payback. The ability, that is. This build can handle tier 120 pits fairly comfortably, even without perfect masterworking or aspects, and slaughters tier 101s insanely quickly. So obviously it destroys tier 4s and uber bosses, etc. It's really fun to play, like most endgame Spiritborn builds are, and takes advantage of the same old 3 unique combination as well. This is the mythic / shroud version of the build, but the build planner will have the non-mythic version as well, which has a number of tweaks, but is still almost as good. So if you like this kind of build guide, like, sub, bell, etc, it means a lot, so thank you. And now let's get to the build. So starting with the skill tree, we're going to take one into Rock Splitter, and get Enhanced Rock Splitter. In our core skills, we're going to be taking 3 into Vigorous, and 3 into Balanced Exertion, as well as 3 into Follow Through. In our focus skills, we're going to be taking 1 into Vortex, 1 into Mirage, 3 into Unrestrained Power, 1 into Focal Point, and 3 into Apex. We're also going to take 1 into Ravager, and we're going for Measured Ravager. In our defensive skills, we're going to be taking 1 into Endurance, as well as 3 into Perseverance, 3 into Armored Hide, and go for Reinforced Armored Hide. Then we're going to take 1 into Counterattack and go for the Reinforced Counterattack. We're also going to take 1 into Scourge, and take Adaptable Scourge. Next up, our Potency skills. We're going to take 3 into Resilient, 3 into Vehemence, 3 into Potent, and 3 into Furnace. And of course, we're going to take 5 into Payback, and we're going to go for the Poised Payback. Then in our ultimate skills, we're going to take 3 into Resolution, Spiritual Attunement, and Supremacy. We're also going to take 2 into the Hunter, and go for the Exalted Hunter. And then in our key passives, we're going to be taking Prodigy's Tempo. Next up, we have the Paragon Board. For the Paragon Board, we're going to start off with our Spirit Glyph. That's going to give us damage to Elite as the legendary bonus, and a lot of critical strike damage, as well as critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from us by 3% for 20 seconds up to 15%. Up from there, in our second board, we're going to be going for Sapping here. So when we cast 3 Gorilla, Jaguar, Eagle, or Centipede skills with the same spirit in a row, we restore 15% of our vigor and deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. The glyph we're going to be using here is Menagerist, so that gives us Incarnate damage as the legendary bonus, and it gives us a big bonus to all magic nodes within range, so importantly here that gives us a lot of maximum resource. And additionally, dealing damage with our Gorilla, Jaguar, Eagle, or Centipede skills increases all damage we deal by 4% for 10 seconds, stacking once per spirit. Then we go to the right for our third board, and that's going to be Revealing. So on lucky hit, we have up to a 30% chance to knock down vulnerable enemies, and we deal 30% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies. As for the glyph, we're going to be using Colossal here, so that gives us a lot of Gorilla skill damage, as well as damage to close enemies as the legendary bonus. Also, we deal 2% increased damage for each stack of Resolve we have. That's why we want to get as much maximum Resolve stacks as possible. For our fourth board, we go up from there and get the Convergence board, so we deal bonus damage equal to 20% of our 2 highest bonus to damage types combined, up to 30% total. And the glyph we're going to be going for here is Fitness, so that gives us increased critical strike damage as the legendary bonus, and critical strike damage per dexterity within the glyph's range. Also, skills that critically strike will generate 3 vigor. And for our fifth and final board, we're going up from the Sapping board, and we're going to be taking Vicious Shield, so we do 1% increased damage for each 3% of our maximum life we have as a barrier. And for the glyph, we're going to be using Outmatch, so we gain increased damage while healthy as our legendary bonus. We also get a large bonus to all rare nodes within range, so that will give us damage while we have a barrier, and critical strike damage. And also we deal 15% increased physical damage to non-elites and bosses. That's it for the Paragon board. Make sure to check out the build planner in the description below if you want to look at it for yourself in detail, as that will have the Paragon board, skills, mercenaries, gear, etc. All of that will be in there. So next up, we have the Mercenaries. For our hired mercenary, we're going to take right here. We're going to go down the left side here with Shield Charge, Rihir's Guard, Provoke, and Mocking Lure. As our reinforcement, we're going to take Variana, and we're going to use Earthbreaker. As for the attachment, we're going to attach that to Scourge. For our Spirit Hall, we're going to be using Jaguar as both of our spirits, primary and secondary. Next up, we have the gear. So for the gear on the left, I'm going to list the affixes and tempering you want to go for, as well as what masterwork you want to try and get. So we're going to start with the Helm. We're going to go for a standard helm with maximum life, maximum resource and potency skills. We're going to temper that with barrier generation and maximum resolve stacks. For the masterworking, you're going to want to masterwork the maximum resolve stacks. For the aspect, we're going to be using apprehension, so once an enemy is slowed by at least 80%, they also become feared for 3 seconds, and we deal 20 to 40% increased damage to feared enemies. Pretty straightforward. For the chest piece, we're going to be using the Shroud of False Death. So that gives us all stats, maximum life, damage on next attack after entering stealth, and resource generation. For the masterworking, we're going to try and masterwork the maximum life. As for the built-in aspect, if we haven't dealt damage in the last 2 seconds, we gain stealth and 40% movement speed. This chest piece also gives 1 to all passives, which is huge considering the amount of passive damage multipliers we use with this build. Next up, we have the gloves. We're going to be using some standard gloves here. We want to go for gloves with attack speed, maximum life, and ranks into core skills, and we want to temper that with barrier generation and basic skill damage. As for the masterworking, we're trying to masterwork those core skills. For the aspect, we're using redirected force, so we gain increased critical strike damage equal to 30 to 70% of our block chance, and blocking doubles this bonus for 10 seconds. For our pants, we're going to be using some normal pants with maximum life, armor, and ranks into basic skills. We're going to temper that with vortex size, and we're going to go for the maximum resolve stacks again as well, and we're going to try and masterwork the maximum resolve stacks. The aspect we're going to use is Interdiction, so we gain 1 to 15% block chance per resolve stack. For the boots, we're going to be using some standard boots here, trying to get some with maximum life, armor, and cold resistance. As for the tempering, we're going to temper that with barrier generation and movement speed. And for the masterworking, we want to try and masterwork maximum life. For the aspect, we're going to be using Duelist, so maximum ferocity will be increased by 1 to 5. Next for the weapon, we're using the Rod of Kepeleke, of course. That gives us implicit block chance, maximum resource, critical strike damage, chance for core skills to hit twice, and ranks into velocity. For the masterworking, you want to try and masterwork the chance for core skills to hit twice, so obviously you want a greater affix on that, and you also want to try and get a greater affix on the maximum resource, for that extra damage that comes from the aspect on this weapon, and also to help with our Banished Lord's Talisman. So the aspect, our core skills are now additionally basic skills and free to cast, and deal up to 30% reduced damage based on their vigor costs. That's why we're tempering some of our items with the basic skill damage. Also, when cast at maximum vigor, your core skills consume all vigor to return full damage cast at their larger size and become guaranteed critical strikes, which is why we don't take any critical strike chance. And those casts of your skills will deal 1 to 3% increased critical strike damage for each point of vigor spent this way. So a mandatory weapon for this build, as well as many other Spiritborn builds. Next up, we have the Amulet. We're going to be using a Banished Lord's Talisman. This gives us maximum life, attack speed, overpower damage, and ranks into core skills. We're going to try and masterwork the maximum life. As for the aspect, whenever we spend 275 of our primary resource, our next core skill is guaranteed to overpower, and our critical strikes that overpower deal 20 to 60% increased damage. So this works really well in conjunction with our Rod of Kepeleke, as well as our next item, the Ring of the Midnight Sun. So that is our first ring, and that's going to give us dexterity, critical strike damage, cooldown reduction, and ranks into Mirage. But more importantly, when we critically strike, we regain 20 to 50% of the vigor we've spent in the last 2 seconds. So obviously you want to try and get as high a roll as possible here, as it really helps a lot in keeping that vigor full between every hit, which allows you to activate the Rod of Kepeleke between every hit, which means you'll expend all of your primary resources to get a crit every hit if your build is optimized. And thanks to the Banished Lords, your core skill will be a guaranteed overpower, and since it will be a crit, it will deal a further 20 to 60% increased damage. On top of that, we also gain counterattack's passive effect, which is why we don't have to have it in the bar. As for the masterworking, we want to try and masterwork the cooldown reduction on this ring. For our second ring, we're using a standard ring with maximum life, attack speed, and lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. We're going to temper this with resource generation or resource cost reduction and basic skill damage. And for the aspect, we're going to be using the aspect of the Moonrise, so damaging an enemy with a basic skill grants us 4% attack speed for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. Upon reaching maximum stacks, you gain 40 to 100% basic skill damage and 15% movement speed for 10 seconds. And for the masterworking on this ring, you want to try and masterwork the maximum life, unless you don't have 80% attack speed without the Moonrise proccing, and in that case, you would want to masterwork the attack speed. But if you have a greater affix attack speed on your gloves and your ring, you should have the adequate attack speed, so just masterwork the maximum life. And if you can for the ring, get the implicit into poison resist if possible. That wraps it up for the gear. For the gems, we're going to be using 2 diamonds and an amethyst in the jewellery for that shadow resistance and resist all. And in our armour, we're going to be using the amethyst for barrier generation. As for the runes, in one of our armour pieces, we're going to be using Pock and Quay. So spending 300% of our maximum resource invokes the Druid's Earthen Bulwark for 3 seconds, granting ourselves a barrier, and the overflow of that goes into increased barrier duration. So basically when you're in combat, Earthen Bulwark will be active at almost all times. And in the weapon, we're going to be using Zol and Zal. So whenever we invoke a skill from another class, in this case Earthen Bulwark, 2 times, then we gain 20% maximum life for 6 seconds. So that about wraps it up for the build. Thanks a lot for watching, hope you learned something, hope it was helpful. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment down below if you feel like it. It really helps the channel a lot and I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll leave you to it. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye.